Hello everyone. So as mentioned, I'm Arvi Teikari. I'm the developer of Baba Is You, and I will be giving a presentation about the development process. It's somewhat self-indulgent of a title or like a topic, but I will try to impart some kind of information that might be just maybe helpful for you also in things not related to Baba Is You. But before I start, there's two disclaimers I want to make. Oh wait, does it? Oh no, is it going to be like a screensaver? Okay, well, we'll deal with this if something happens. Anyway, first of all, do not believe what I say. I'm going to be talking about things that I personally experienced and that I personally maybe found helpful or interesting to think about. But I want to stress that what I'm going to say is going to be my own personal experiences, and they are probably not applicable to every person. So if I say something like making a game that is about, I don't know, vomiting on the floor is the best idea in the world, that might be true to me, but it might not be true to you. So please take whatever I say with a pinch of salt, unless I talk about my personal past, in which case I probably know better than you, I hope. The other disclaimer is that I want to warn you that take a look at this person. This is me from around 2015, 2014. Look at this beautiful head of hair, and look what happened because of game development. This is me now. So I want to warn you that indie game development is a plot by Big Bold to sell more hair loss. You have been warned. I'm pretty happy with my current head of hair, but I do like the contrast, pretty funny, so I wanted to include this slide. Okay, let's actually begin. Here are the topics that I'm actually going to cover. I'm going to first explain a little bit about myself. Then I will explain a little bit about Baba Is You in case there are people who don't know about Baba Is You. Then I will actually go through some the rough sketch of the development process, and also some like design goals and design intentions in Baba Is You, and also a little bit like which parts of those design goals I feel the game maybe succeeded in and maybe didn't succeed in. And then I will talk about the future of the game, and finally I will show you pictures of my two cats. Okay, so who am I? I already gave my name, and it's actually not written here, so if you didn't catch it the first two times, you will never know who I am. I've been making games since 2002. I was 10 years old at that point. I was interested in making games even before that. My interest in making games goes as far back as kindergarten. There's kind of a funny thing where when I was in kindergarten, a lot of kids of my age had older siblings like sisters and brothers who played video games. So there was this kind of idea that video games are something that the cool older kids do. And so in the kindergarten, I remember that there was this like pastime of drawing our own games on paper and letting our friends solve them by just showing with their finger, like I'm moving here, I'm now going to do this. And something that I vividly remember from that, even though I don't remember much of those times, is that the game design we did in kindergarten was very social in the way that when you let someone play your game, if the person playing was someone you didn't like, they would not be able to finish the game. They would die. If the person playing your game was someone you liked or a friend of yours, they would inevitably succeed. I specifically remember a situation where the player was presented with two buttons and asked to press one of them, and obviously the result depended on how much you liked the person. But I would say that 2002 is when I actually started making games in the sense of like making graphical games. I started out with Game Maker. A schoolmate of mine introduced it to me in 2002, and we started out with that. Unfortunately, Game Maker, even at that time, had its own scripting language, the GML, and which is in English and also in programming language. So because I was fairly young at that point, it was kind of difficult to understand both the programming part of it and also the English part of it. And that combined with a lack of patience that I think most 10-year-olds have in them, it was very difficult for me to start using this scripting language, and so my ability to use Game Maker became kind of limited, which eventually led me into this this family of tools made by the company ClickTeam, which includes there's the word Fusion at the bottom of the slide there. It's this program called Multimedia Fusion, which has the Games Factory and Click and Play as its predecessors. And this family of tools made by Click Team used to be fairly popular. I think they might actually have been some of the very first graphical game creation tools. Click and Play, the first tool released in I think 1994. But since then they have fallen by the wayside because they haven't really been updating in time with the developments in the field. So nowadays programs such as Construct, which actually started out as a direct competitor to Fusion, and Game Maker Studio and so on have become the more well-known game creation tools. The reason why I want to talk about this in length is just because I want to stress this mainly no actual programming part of the slide, which is that in my life, I have never really used like an actual programming language like C# or C++. I've always used these game creation tools apart from a very brief visitation of Quick Basic and nowadays some Lua script. But even Lua is a scripting language, so programming purists would not call it an actual programming language. And I feel like it's important to stress that you can make games that people enjoy, that might also do well commercially, even though those are not directly linked, even if you don't know how to do actual programming. So keep that in mind. There have been a lot of cool games made in Game Maker, Fusion, RPG Maker, and so on over the years. So don't lose hope, even if someone laughs at you for using a tool that is not as professional as someone else would like. In my case, something that I noticed at a certain point is that I really enjoy making small experimental games, making these kind of quick tests of an idea that seems interesting, not necessarily committing to a large-scale game, more just trying out something and making it only as big as it needs to be before the idea falls flat, or okay, sometimes even beyond that. It's hard to stop when you're having fun, but at least trying to keep it kind of small and simple. And I feel like game jams such as Ludum Dare and Nordic Game Jam have been very instrumental for me in terms of exploring these experimental game ideas, because for me, the kind of most enjoyable part of game development is when you're throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks, and this kind of 48-hour just try to make something that works mindset has been very lucrative in that sense, because when you're doing a game at the Game Jam, you really don't have the time to consider how to fix all the bugs or how to make the presentation super cool or how to make the graphics very flashy. You really usually have to concentrate on just exploring the core idea. So for me, what this means is that I have a perfect excuse of making a rough draft of an idea. And then if I really like the idea, after the jam, I can say that, well, I guess I'll develop this further, like happened with Baba Is You. Or if the idea doesn't end up working, or if it's an idea that feels like it doesn't really lend itself to a full game, it's something that only works in this smaller scale context, I can say that, well, that was that game and move on. And for me, that feels very freeing, which is why I keep coming here year after year and also doing Ludum Dare. Unfortunately, Ludum Dare is happening at this exact same weekend as Nordic Game Jam. So currently I have to decide whether I want to do 2 games in this weekend or just 1 game for both events or skipping one of them. And just quickly, I've made kind of 2 commercial titles of my own and released them on Steam so far. Environmental Station Alpha in 2015, and then Baba Is You in 2019. I also worked on the game Noita, but because it was not under my own company, it was more a team project. I usually don't include it as an example of like games I made, because I have a very bizarre sense of ownership to my projects. And I already mentioned this mainly no actual programming thing. So Baba Is You. Baba Is You is a game that falls into this general category of block pushing puzzle games, which is a puzzle game genre that has become vastly more popular over the past 10 or so years. I feel like the game Stephen's Sausage Roll was a very big name in making this genre more popular. And Puzzle Script, made by Stephen Lavelle, the developer of Stephen's Sausage Roll, has also been very important in making this specific genre of pushing blocks on a grid gain more popularity. And right now, there have been a lot of really cool games in this genre, including stuff like A Can of Wormholes, Snakebird, Pipe Push Paradise, what else? I keep forgetting some important names. A Monsters Expedition, just to name a couple of examples. There's been a lot of really cool games. Oh, Patrick's Parabox, of course. And all of these games technically, on some level, originate from the game Sokoban, which is an old Japanese game. The name means warehouse keeper. And in the original Sokoban, you literally had only, I think, is it 4 elements in the game? You had the player moving on the grid, you had walls, you have the boxes you could push, and you had spots that you pushed these boxes onto. And that was literally everything you had in that game. And every puzzle was built around pushing boxes onto these marked spots. Something that I really enjoy about game design in general and about this Sokoban block pushing concept in specific is that it's a concept that has very simple basic rules that can then be varied very heavily just by doing small changes to the basic concept or just by adding little things. And the thing that Baba Is You adds to this basic concept is that you have these pushable blocks, you have the walls, you have stuff, but then you also have words. And these words are also pushable blocks in the game world. They are just like these boxes in Sokoban, but they can also form sentences because they are words. I almost said worms. And these rules that you can form with these words can then change how the game works. And that is kind of the core innovation or idea of Baba Is You, is that you can change the rules of the game. And because the game features sentences and you change the sentences immediately after the Nordic Game Jam where I made Baba Is You, people told me that Baba Is You is a programming game. And I was kind of afraid of the word programming game because for me, the word meant at that time something like Zachtronics games where you build machinery and try to optimize that machinery. And especially optimization is something that I dislike, which everyone who has looked at Baba Is You's source code knows. So I was kind of afraid of this definition or description of programming game. But in time, I've learned to understand the word on a more like a wider scale. And I feel like Baba Is You sometimes is kind of a programming game. It's definitely a game where you can make programs by using those words. But I would maybe say that the core idea is still not quite about programming, even though it has some programming energy to it. Just to give a simple idea of how the game looks and works for those of you who haven't seen Baba Is You, here is what the game looks like. And here we have this creature Baba on the left. We have a rock next to Baba, then a couple of walls, which might be a little bit difficult to see against the black background, and then a flag. And we have 4 of these sentences. We have Baba Is You, rock is push, wall is stop, and flag is win. Baba Is You just means that you, the player, control Baba. You can move Baba around, and Baba moves on the grid. Rock is push means that the rock is a pushable thing. Rock is those boxes from Sokoban. Wall is stop means that the wall is an obstacle. It's the walls from Sokoban. And finally, flag is win means that when Baba or something that is you, the player, makes contact with a flag, you win the level. This is not something that was in the original Sokoban, but was something that I don't know where it came from, but I just put it in. And obviously, you could make a simple Sokoban style level where you just push boxes in correct places in Baba Is You. But of course, the most interesting puzzles in this case come from the levels where you push the words around to change the rules. So you could, for example, say that rock is you to be able to control the rock. Or you could say Baba is win to make Baba the win condition. Or you could even say wall is Baba to turn all the walls into Babas in order to have more Babas to move around. And this kind of playfulness is, I feel, one of the most important things that made Baba a successful game, and I will come back to that a little bit later. So, the actual development process. I was at Nordic Game Jam in 2017. I wasn't planning to make a game at all. I had 2 existing large projects, one of which was the sequel to the Environmental Station Alpha, my first commercial game, and the other one was a game that I will not be talking about more because it's still not finished. Okay, Environmental Station Alpha sequel is also not finished, but anyway, so my plan was to come to Nordic Game Jam more to meet friends and hang out than to make a game. But then I heard the theme for the year. Nordic Game Jam I really like because there is a theme and there is some kind of a voting for which game people like better, or at least has been on some years, but there is no kind of a competitive vibe to the event, at least from my viewpoint, where there would be like a hard push that you have to include the theme, you have to make the most beautiful game, you have to do a team project. I feel like Nordic Game Jam is kind of free form in many ways, which I personally really enjoy. And so the not there theme that was for that year, I also felt that I could interpret fairly freely. Like it was not something where I would have to incorporate the entire meaning of the theme to make a good entry. I could interpret it the way I wanted. And the way I interpreted it was that I started thinking of logical operators, and specifically the way how in logic and in programming you can say not something. You can take a concept X and you can say not X to have the reverse of X. And this very, very simple concept of not just combined in my head with some game ideas I had been pondering about before that. For example, I had been playing Stephen's Sausage Roll and Cosmic Express and A Good Snowman is Hard to Build fairly recently before the event. And these ideas and also my desire to make a puzzle game, I had been unsuccessfully trying to make these traditional puzzle games in the past before this event. All of these things just mushed up in my head and gave me this mental idea of a grid-based game where you have a pool of lava and the lava is obviously hot, and then you have blocks of ice, and because the ice blocks are made of ice, they can't go near the lava because the lava is hot. But then you would be able to make the rule ice is not melt to remove the meltability of the ice to be able to push the ice into the lava. And as far as I can remember, obviously it's been 8 years at this point, so it's kind of hard to remember anymore. But as far as I can remember, this is what it started from. And then when I got this idea, my first feeling was that that's probably not going to make a good game. I thought that if this game would either be very difficult to make puzzles for, like it would be more like an interesting tech demo than something that makes for actually interesting puzzles, or I would run into some kind of an implementational issue, like it would be something where it seems like a simple concept, but when I start to implement it, I run into some kind of a coding issue that would take forever to fix, and then I end up finishing nothing. But as I mentioned, something that I like about game jams in general is that you can take an idea that you don't know if it's going to work, you can throw it at the wall, see if it sticks, and then you are under no obligation to keep working on it if it doesn't stick. And in this case, I decided that, okay, I'm not feeling very good about this idea. I'm going to try to make it anyway because I'm at the perfect location to do that. And it ended up working out pretty well. Baba Is You was voted the best game of the event, and people seemed really into it. So that was super cool. And while I was working on this idea, it also evolved organically. So for example, the original idea has this ice is not melt thing where the ice and the lava had these internal inherent qualities of ice being meltable and lava being hot that you could remove from them. But as I worked on the Game Jam version, I actually turned this upside down where the ice was not meltable by default at all, the lava was not hot by default at all, and instead you would bestow these qualities to these things. So one of the things that changed that I think was a very important change in terms of the kind of vibe of the game was the thing that objects didn't have inherent properties apart from some very specific exceptions, and instead you would give them these properties because this would create some more interesting circumstances, which I will also return to a little bit later. But once I was done with Baba Is You at Nordic Game Jam, and I had gotten feedback from people that they liked the idea. People laughed a lot at the presentation I did at the award ceremony, and that gave me confidence that I had something interesting in my hands, but I was still kind of unconvinced that it would actually make for a good game. Part of the reason why I felt that was that, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes when you make a Game Jam game, it might be super fun at the Game Jam, but when you try to consider how would I make kind of a full-fledged thing out of this, you realize that, okay, this is actually something that only really works at a Game Jam. For example, one year a person made a game at Nordic Game Jam where the idea was that there's a very sensitive microphone and there's a mouth in the middle of the screen, and you have to get this lemming-style creature across a gap. And the mouth reacts to people shouting, the noise level, and the whole audience in this very auditorium had to shout at this sensitive microphone to make the mouth rise at the right level so that this lemming could get across. And that is an idea that is super cool. I love the idea, but it would be kind of difficult to make a very fun single-player game to put on Steam based on that, I feel. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the feel I get. So with Baba Is You, I also wasn't certain if this would be an idea that would actually expand into a good, fully-fledged game, or if it would be something that's only really doable in this game jam context. But other people kept talking to me that I should make a full version about it, so I started pondering about it. And one of the very first issues I had with the idea of what to do with this concept of Baba Is You is that I felt like I was standing at the crossroads where I could either take the game towards this kind of sandboxy, playful, toy-like direction, where the game is less about puzzles and more about showcasing these interesting interactions that the game allows. I noticed that people reacted very positively to the interactions I showed, this like wall is Baba thing that I mentioned, for example. And it seemed like one of the directions I could take the game would be kind of concentrating on that playfulness. The other direction would be to make more of a hardcore puzzle game, because in my mind, the concept, the way it started was as a block-pushing puzzle game. And ultimately, after considering this a little bit, I decided that if I'm going to make a game out of this, I'm going to make a puzzle game, because that is what speaks more to me. That is maybe not the thing that speaks most to some other people, but it's the game I kind of want to make more when comparing these two extremes. Obviously, I would try to find a way to incorporate both of these things in the game, but I did feel like from the get-go I was making a puzzle game instead of like a playful sandboxy thing. Another interesting consideration that came up very early was, do I want to have a story in this game? Should I have a story in this game? I felt like if I want to make a commercial release, I should maybe have some kind of a story. People like stories. What should I do? And a person actually contacted me about this, and they told me that they got some ideas from the Game Jam version of Baba Is You, and also some other people told me the same thing, where they felt that the game was about consciousness, because in Baba Is You, you have this word you, and whatever is you becomes you, the player. So kind of your consciousness moves with this word you. And when you change the rule to say that something else is you, it's as if this consciousness moves between characters. And people asked me, did I have an idea in my mind that I would do this like philosophical take on the nature of consciousness? No, I didn't. I wanted to make a puzzle game. But it was interesting to hear that other people thought that I had this kind of thought behind it. And as mentioned, one person approached me and told me that they had this like Buddhism-inspired story idea for Baba Is You if I would be interested in collaborating with them. I ended up declining for reasons that I will get into in the next slide, but it was still very interesting to see that some people were clearly inspired by this implied story element in the game that in my mind was very purely like an abstract puzzle game in a way. Yeah, so as mentioned, I got a lot of feedback from developer friends. A couple of weeks after the Game Jam, I released like a closed version to some of my game developer friends and got a lot of feedback from them, including, for example, Alan Hazelden, the developer of A Monster's Expedition and A Good Snowman is Hard to Build. I'm very indebted to Alan Hazelden for all the feedback he and some other people gave across the game's development. But as I started developing the game from there, actually showcasing it to people and getting this mindset of like, I'm going to make a full game out of this, more issues arose. The two big ones being, or I guess this could be distilled into one big one. How much do I want to consider marketability when making decisions about the basic structure of the game or the basic elements of the game? I already mentioned the story, but graphics and audio were also a big consideration, because I felt like usually when I make a game, I want to try to make the assets as final as possible, as early as possible, especially for visuals, maybe less so for audio. So for visuals, I felt like I wanted to have a decision what kind of a visual style I want to go for before I get seriously working on the game. And because it seemed like this was an idea that would have that would potentially be commercially interesting or commercially successful, it seemed necessary to consider, should I optimize for marketability when designing the game? Should I go, for example, for 3D art, which is not something that I personally know how to do, so that the game would be more appealing to players? ultimately, in basically every single place, well, okay, you can see the art style of the game. You can see that I optimized for marketability. So for every single case of this type that I considered, ultimately my decision was, the game's idea seems very strong. I'm going to trust that the game is going to do well, even if the audio and the graphics are not that great, even if I do things the way I want to do them, even if I don't optimize for marketability. I will gamble on the fact that it's a really good game idea, and I will hope that even if people don't vibe with the presentation, they might vibe with the idea enough that they will give it a chance. And I'm really happy that I did this, because making Baba Is You was the most fun I've ever had making a game. It was so much fun to explore the idea and also feel that I wasn't kind of trying to do this kind of cynical optimization of like trying to make the most marketable product for the mobile audience. I don't know. I just wanted to make a game that I would personally enjoy making, and that was important to me. And that made the development process very fun and also fairly fast, because the game went from the beginning, from the Game Jam version, to finish in about 2 years, which was maybe faster than I maybe would have expected at a certain point. And it also meant that, as mentioned, making the game was fun. And originally, I was planning about 60 levels for the game. Like, this was my estimation of like how many level ideas I can come up with during development. And in the end, I made over 200 levels, and then in 2021 I released the game level editor update, which added another 200 levels. I feel like with Baba Is You, the problem was more the classic killing your darlings thing, where I was very loath to let go of certain ideas that I feel were interesting, but maybe didn't showcase the game in the best of ways. And in hindsight, I do wish I had cut some of the levels. There are some levels that are very messy, very overcomplicated, but I guess I was still optimizing for fun at that point. The level design process is something that I've given presentations about a lot. People have been interested about like, how do you make a puzzle level? And my way of making a puzzle level is that I get like, okay, I was trying to make a joke here, but the first joke that came to mind would have been necessarily brutal. So let's just say that I was meditating on it, fasting for 90 days, and I came up with one level. So I did that 200 times to come up with the levels. Not a very good joke, but maybe better than what I would have come up with in the first place. But no, the actual way I made levels for the game was what I called reverse engineering at the time, which was that I tried to think of the components I had for the puzzles, basically the different words, the different ways the words interact with each other and with the game world and the basic block pushing elements. And I tried to, usually just in my brain, sometimes also in the level editor, to kind of put these different components together in different ways to try to figure out kind of situations where something interesting happens, where like two different components, not necessarily even two different words, but two different kind of game elements interact in a way that feels cool to me. And then when I came up with something that seemed cool, I would try to make a level that has a bottleneck, where the bottleneck requires you to use that interaction to get through it. And this is why I call it reverse engineering, because I'm kind of start out from the kind of crux of the puzzle and then work backwards from that to the like initial state. Not maybe the best word, but whatever, I latched on it. This level design process was often very entertaining. I did use a lot of different level design processes. I don't want to claim that this was some kind of like secret magical trick for making good puzzles. And this reverse engineering approach also had its own problems. The biggest one of which I feel was that it left the levels very open for unintended solutions, because when I only considered the like crux of the puzzle, it was very easy to forget about some like alternative direction. But also these unintended solutions ended up being strength in some situations, especially in the early levels, because as I mentioned, I had decided to make a game that was more about the puzzles than the playfulness, but I still wanted to incorporate some playfulness in the game, and I feel like these unintended solutions sometimes could work in favor of this like playfulness, where the player could feel that they could kind of break a level. But a problem that I did face was that as the player gets further in the game, the levels necessarily become more intricate because the puzzles have to be more convoluted because they are more difficult. And the unintended solutions, on the other hand, will remain fairly similar throughout. So for example, if you have a level where the rule wall is stop can be interacted with, and you can break the rule wall is stop and just skip the level and get straight to the ending, it's very likely that any given level with an unintended solution is going to be fairly similar to that. So as I made more and more levels to the game, I noticed that I had to actually reduce the amount of unintended solutions because those unintended solutions were becoming kind of less interesting. So in Baba Is You, it feels like the final design ended up being such that in the early game, you can be more creative and playful, and as you get further, it becomes more strictly a puzzle game. And I feel like some people have commented that they definitely prefer those early levels because of partially exactly this, and I totally understand. Anyway, as I was working on the game, as mentioned, the game development took about 2 years. I spent maybe about the first year just adding more content and letting my mind go where it wants, and then maybe the second year kind of trying to bring things together, although I did add more stuff like a couple of weeks before release, so I didn't manage to, I didn't do any kind of like a proper feature freeze. That would be way too difficult for my personal brain chemistry. And during the development, I sent Baba Is You to a couple of events, including the IGF Independent Games Festival, where it was nominated for a couple of categories. I feel like the IGF was maybe the singular biggest reason why people were aware of Baba Is You on its release. I might be wrong, but that's my hunch. I sent it to Indicade, which was an interesting trip for myself, but maybe not, I wouldn't maybe say that the impact of the Indicade event was that big. Same maybe goes for Gamescom. I feel like Gamescom is maybe an event for bigger games rather than small indie games. Who knows, but that's my vibe. All of these events were useful though in the sense that they gave me live feedback from people, and also from people who were not people who play a lot of games. So for example, at Gamescom, if someone came to the booth and played the game and there was like a parent with their kid and the kid is playing and maybe the adult is also looking at the game, I would get a sense of kind of like, how does a person who is not very used to the language of games in the same way I am, or to the same language as I am to the language of games, how do they interpret the game? So for example, in Baba Is You, I have this one decorative thing that is like stars blinking, which is one of the objects you can interact with the game and make rules for. And originally, the word for that object was spark. So you could say spark is you, and you would control this block of sparks. And when you open a door in Baba Is You, when a door is locked and you unlock the door, it releases this shower of sparks. And one person at the booth like this actually commented that if I say spark is win, can I win the level by touching the sparks that come out of the door when I open it? And that was something that I hadn't considered at all, but it made complete sense. Like if you are not thinking of the game as like, these are the object, these are the abstractations of the game design. If you're just thinking of the game as it's presented, it totally makes sense that you could win the level by touching the sparks released from opening a door. So I ended up changing the word spark into dust because it seemed less likely to get that problem. So I feel like these live events, even if they were not maybe the most important for the game in terms of like raising awareness for the game, it was important or useful as feedback for myself. Also, as a funny anecdote from the IGF times, around the same time that the game went to IGF, a person that I won't mention registered babaisyou.com, Baba Is You on Twitter, and released a game called Baba Is You on the App Store and Google Play Store. That was their interpretation of Baba Is You. I contacted them. We had a discussion where this person told me, hey, I ripped off your game, but I would like to do a collaboration. I can make a game, your game for you on mobile, and I'll get some of the money. And I feel like starting with the rip-off of my game and releasing without my consent is not a really good way of like doing business with me. And once I told this person to take their rip-off game off App Store, they later released the game again under a different name. And this new version of the game that also had new graphics so that I couldn't like send a takedown notice, had a new character that was an angry version of the main character game, and this angry version of main character had my name. So if you play a particular Baba Is You ripoff on the App Store, you might find a character named Arvi that looks like an angry blob, because I feel like this person was angry at me for asking them to take down this ripoff. So yeah, this is the fun you live with. This is the kind of stuff that made my face turn this way. Okay, and okay. Feedback and encouragement. What a general statement. Why did I write that there? Wait, I received a lot of feedback and encouragement. I guess that's enough. People were very polite about Baba Is You throughout the development, which definitely helped with staying motivated. Then there's this company in Denmark, MP2 Games, which specializes in porting games that are difficult to port. The main person in MP2 Games, Matthias, actually started out working with this Click Team suite of products that I myself used, and created this engine called Chowdren that was originally specifically for porting these Fusion-made games, because it's a game creation tool, kind of a black box, closed source thing. It's very difficult to port games made with Fusion, and even more so nowadays when like expectations have changed and Fusion itself has been lagging very far behind its competitors. And MP2 Games kind of came to be specifically as a solution to game developers struggling with a product or a game they have made they cannot release on consoles, for example, because they lack the know-how and they have dedicated their time to an engine that doesn't allow that very easily. So MP2 Games contacted me and showed me like a prototype of Baba Is You made for Nintendo Switch, and we ended up collaborating, and it has been very useful. And if you are someone who is working, for example, on an RPG Maker or a construct game or a Game Maker Studio game that you realize you would like to port for some other platform, and you realize that you don't know how to do that, MP2 Games might be someone to contact. Obviously, there are other options, but you might understand why I'm biased on this topic. And also, MP2 Games implemented the mobile version, which we released in 2021 alongside the level editor. The level editor was also something where I feel like the game, by its basic nature, kind of demanded a level editor, because, as I mentioned, during the development process, I concentrated on the puzzle aspect instead of the playfulness, but I feel like the level editor was a good way of encouraging more of the playfulness from players, because the players could make their own levels and like interact with the words in ways that they normally couldn't. And so far, the official level server has about like 70,000 levels uploaded to it, which I'm really happy about. Like, people have done amazing things with Baba Is You. On my YouTube channel, you can even find a recording of me playing Legend of Zelbaba, a linkiki between words, which is a Zelda parody made in Baba Is You. And people have made stuff like recreating other games. There's a level in YouTube which is a Doom made in Baba Is You. There's Minesweeper, The Witness, Sudoku. People have done really amazing stuff, basically like programming stuff in Baba Is You, and I'm very flattered and amazed about people's dedication to the game, and I'm very happy about that. So, final couple things. When designing the game, I feel like there were certain things that I had in me as my normal kind of approach to designing things in general that instructed how I approach the design. But I feel like the Baba Is You concept itself also had some details that informed the way the games would end up working and the way people would find it interesting. As I mentioned earlier, I feel like one of the most important things from my perspective in Baba Is You is that it surprises the player by presenting them with familiar concepts and then changing those concepts. So you have the idea of wall is stop. Obviously, in most games, walls are not something you can go through. Or rock is push. Again, there are many of these block pushing games. These pushable blocks are very basic as a concept. Or a flag being your goal post is also a very common thing. But being able to change the rules, being able to say that, oh, now the wall is what you need to touch to win the level, or saying that now you're controlling the walls, feels like it takes these familiar concepts and turns them on their head or changes the context completely, which I think is something that people resonated with and kind of caught people's inspiration in a good way. And it did catch my inspiration as well. So I feel like that is maybe the most important thing that made Baba Is You as a concept successful. When it comes to my own interest when making the game is I wanted to explore the idea as deeply as possible. I feel like sometimes I really appreciate it when a game concept goes through all the implications of the concept, even if some of those implications are not the most interesting, or even if they sometimes are frustrating. Sometimes I feel like it's fun to play a game where maybe there's one puzzle that is just not that fun to play, but that showcases something about the concept that you wouldn't otherwise see. And so once I beat the level, I might feel like that was not the fun level. I didn't enjoy playing the level, but it was interesting. For example, Stephen's Sausage Roll has a very infamous level, the Great Tower, which I won't spoil what happens in that level, but I stopped playing that game 2 times before finally getting through that level, and I don't like that level, but it does showcase something very interesting about the game. So it's a difficult thing, but I personally usually do enjoy that kind of an approach, and I try to do that with Baba Is You. And I feel like some of those levels I mentioned that I feel in hindsight too messy and overly complicated are maybe born out of this desire of exploring the concept as deeply as possible. And again, here comes the playfulness, where the game itself, as its core direction, I didn't go for the playfulness, but I did try to incorporate it. And as I've already explained, the level editor and these unintended solutions were ways for me to try to encourage that, even if some of the later levels are kind of strict in what they require you to do. And when I make games, when I make basically anything, one of my biggest driving goals that I've noticed is that I want to amuse and surprise the player. My favorite moment as a game designer is when I see someone experience a game I made and something catches them off guard and they let out this like laughter of surprise of like, oh, I didn't expect that, that's cool. Or like, wait, what is happening? Like that amazement or surprise or shock, this kind of emotional response is what I look after, which also means that I look a lot at streams of my own games, which is maybe not always healthy, but don't hate me for that. But then with these design goals, some of the issues I faced, and I feel like these are the issues that I didn't manage to solve, like these are the issues that remain in the game on some level, is, as I mentioned earlier, killing your darlings, letting go of ideas that are clearly not working and trimming out the kind of extra. Because some of the ideas in Baba Is You are maybe not as interesting as I maybe thought they were. Some of the ideas were maybe a little bit too convoluted to require the player to understand. Some of the ideas were honestly just bad. And I should have said to myself, I should have had the willpower to say that you should cut that out. But I didn't. I left most of those in. There are a couple of examples, though, where I did cut out a level. There was like one, I don't have the time to explain the full thing. You can come ask me later. But there was one situation where I realized that if you think about the rules in a specific way, it should be possible to go through walls in this very specific circumstance. And I made a level where you can go through walls. And testers told me, no, that makes no sense, that no one is going to understand that that's just bad. And I did remove that level. So sometimes I did the right thing. Adjusting difficulty was another thing. Everyone knows, every game developer knows that when you make a game, you know the game throughout, so it's very hard for you to estimate the difficulty. Baba Is You was no different. And also because of the wanting to explore the premise as deeply as possible, there were a lot of levels that I feel were already very difficult, and they became even more difficult for people who didn't have the intrinsic knowledge of the underlying stuff. And so I had trouble adjusting the difficulty. Ultimately, I tried to go for a thing where the levels are grouped into clusters based on which word they incorporate. So when you get deeper into the game, you learn more levels or more words. And within each level cluster, there's like an individual difficulty curve, so that when you get to the final level of an area, the level is going to be difficult. When you go to the first level of the next area, the difficulty will again be fairly easy, so that the most important thing is that the player gets drip-fed these new words instead of the difficulty curve being very constant. I like this idea, I still like it. I feel like it didn't fully work because many players thought that I have to beat every level in every area, so they would keep doing these increasingly difficult levels, then finally beat them, go to the next area, and then be faced with very easy levels again. But I do still think that I would do things the same way if I were to make the game again. But making that difficulty curve is difficult, especially if you want a sprawling world map like I wanted to. I love Super Mario World, and I knew from the get-go that I want to have like a slightly non-linear level map like in Super Mario World. And concentrating on the core idea is there just to like re-emphasize the idea of like sometimes it's easy to get lost thinking about these like cool interactions and forget what is the thing that makes the game interesting for players. In Baba Is You's case, there were some levels that were maybe more about the block pushing part or maybe more about like underlying programming of the game instead of the cool rule changing thing. And there are some levels still in the game that are more about that instead of the rules. And I feel like it might have been better if I had removed most of the levels that don't deal directly with the rules, because that's the thing why people are actually playing the game. But it is what it is. Okay, let's go really quickly through this. So in 2021 and 2022, I slowed down development. As mentioned, in 2022, we released the level editor. And after the level editor, I felt I was kind of done with the game, or at least I tried to tell myself that. And I also tried to tell the fans that I'm slowly stopping development. In 2019, when Baba Is You came out, I answered about 1,400 emails on my own relating to Baba Is You. So it felt like I kind of also wanted to move on at that point. It was kind of rough. Hiring a PR person or someone to answer your emails might be a good idea. I've been also trying to use Baba Is You, or not use Baba for teaching, but people have been interested in utilizing Baba for teaching, and I've been very flattered by people seeing that potential in Baba Is You, and I've been really excited to encourage people to do so. So people have been, for example, asking me for keys to showcase the game for their students in schools, and I love that people want to do that, and I've been very happy to provide keys for that. And also, well, I'm talking to you right here, so using Baba at events to show pictures of my cats has been very lucrative. And also, the game is popular. I've been trying to avoid getting too cynical about it, to think about Baba Is You as a franchise of like, let's make a Baba amusement park, let's make Baba Funko Pops or something. But it has still felt a good idea to make things that relate to the concepts. And the way I've actually ended up doing this has been making these smaller spin-off games. I've made several of these like usually humorous takes on Baba Is You. For example, Baba Is You Extreme, which you can download for free on my itch.io website. I also made a mech game, Mobile Suit Baba, where you control the Baba characters in mech suits. I really enjoyed the game Into the Breach, and I was inspired to combine the concept of Into the Breach and Baba Is You, and Mobile Suit Baba was the result of that. And I'm really happy that I ended up making like a fully fledged game out of such an oddball idea. And I'm currently working on Planet Kiki, which is kind of like a 2D space exploration thing with Baba characters. And that is again something where it just feels like it's not really related to Baba Is You, it's not related to the rule changing thing, but it feels like the Baba characters have like gained their own life outside of the original game. And on some level, I want to encourage that. The Baba fan community has also been very interested in learning more about the characters. And to some extent, I've been happy to provide that information and also explore it myself. I've developed a kind of a lore for the world that I want to explore in some kind of a Baba Is You adventure or RPG game one day. But the fan community has also been very interested about some details that I maybe wouldn't have considered myself. For example, what does Baba's flesh taste like? What kind of internal organs does Baba have? Does Baba have lungs? What kind of texture does Baba's skin have? How does Baba reproduce? How big do they get? This kind of stuff. It's fun to think about that, but sometimes it goes maybe further than I'm ready to think about. And in general, the world of Baba exists now. I'm happy about that, and I do want to keep making games set in the Baba world. Thank you.